The international airport was alive with energy, a place where thousands of lives intersected every second. The hum of rolling suitcases, the beeping of check-in kiosks, and the soft chatter of eager travelers created a constant, rhythmic symphony. Flight announcements echoed overhead, listing destinations that spanned the entire globe: Paris, Tokyo, New York, Dubai. Near Gate 14, a small but exclusive first-class boarding area shimmered with quiet luxury. The seats were wider, the refreshments classier, and the atmosphere unmistakably different from the economy section. Business executives in tailored suits tapped away on laptops, sipping espressos. A well-dressed couple whispered in French, sharing a private joke. And then, among them, stood David Carter Jr., a 10-year-old black boy, neatly dressed in a navy blue blazer and khaki slacks, his backpack securely strapped over his shoulders. His deep brown eyes sparkled with excitement. It was his first time flying alone, and not just any flight, first class. David clutched his first-class ticket, tracing his fingers over the embossed gold lettering. His father, David Carter Sr., had surprised him that morning with the ticket, insisting he was now old enough to fly like a young gentleman. But what excited David more than the flight was the idea of seeing his father's face when he told him all about it later. David Carter Sr. was no ordinary businessman. He was the self-made billionaire behind Carter Aviation, one of the largest airline corporations in the world. But unlike most billionaires, he preferred a modest, grounded lifestyle. No flashy suits, no expensive watches, just a sharp mind and an unwavering belief in hard work. Unbeknownst to David Jr., his father had quietly built an empire, one that would soon play a crucial role in this very moment. And then, there was Karen Stevens. The moment she spotted David Jr., she narrowed her eyes. A woman in her mid-40s, she had perfected the art of looking important. Her crisp uniform was always pressed, her blonde bob sat perfectly in place, and her badge, clipped neatly onto her shirt, read Senior Flight Attendant. But what the badge didn't say was how much she enjoyed authority, especially when it allowed her to dictate who did or did not belong in first class. David Jr. stepped forward confidently, handing over his ticket to Karen. "Good afternoon," he said politely, just as his father had taught him. Karen barely glanced at him before her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his youthful face, his neatly cropped curls, his small frame standing alone among the sea of adults. She frowned. Something didn't fit. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice carrying that condescending tone reserved for talking to children, or worse, people she didn't think belonged. David blinked. "No, ma'am. This is my flight." He smiled, pushing the ticket toward her. Karen let out a small, breathy laugh, a laugh filled with disbelief. "Honey," she said, shaking her head, "this is the first-class line." "I know. You must be confused. Economy check-in is back that way." She pointed vaguely over her shoulder. David's small fingers curled around his ticket. His excitement dimmed just a little, but his father had always told him, "Confidence, son. You don't need to explain yourself to those who assume." So he stood his ground. "No, ma'am. My seat is in first class." Karen pursed her lips, her patience thinning. "Where are your parents?" David remained polite but firm. "My father booked my ticket. I'm traveling alone today." Karen folded her arms. She had seen this before, some kid trying to board a better seat, thinking they could get away with it. She had stopped dozens before. This one would be no different. She reached for the ticket, barely glancing at it before scoffing. "Impossible." "No," she said flatly. "This is a mistake." David tilted his head. "What?" "You can't be in first class," Karen stated, matter-of-factly. "This must be a mix-up." David furrowed his brows. "But it's not," Karen sighed dramatically, as if dealing with an inconvenience. "Listen, sweetheart, first class is for passengers who actually paid for their tickets. You need to step aside so real passengers can board." David's stomach tightened. People were starting to stare. A few passengers raised their brows at the interaction, while others looked away, uninterested. "But I did pay for my ticket," David insisted. "My father." Karen snatched the ticket from his hand, and before David could react, she tore it straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper felt like an explosion in David's ears. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Wait. Did she just?" David's heart pounded. "I'm sorry," Karen said with a smug smile, "but you won't be flying first class today." Silence stretched between them. Karen turned to the next passenger as if dismissing him. David took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and lifted his chin. He looked Karen directly in the eye and, with a calmness beyond his years, simply said, "You just made a big mistake." Karen Stevens crossed her arms as she stared down at David Jr., her lips pressed into a satisfied smirk. The torn remnants of his ticket fluttered to the floor between them, but she didn't care. To her, this was just another day, another moment of keeping order, or at least, her version of it. She waved over airport security with a sharp flick of her wrist. "This boy is trying to sneak into first class," she said, her voice dripping with authority. "He doesn't have a valid ticket and is causing a scene." A few passengers murmured among themselves. Some whispered that Karen had overstepped, while others, perhaps conditioned to trust authority, simply assumed she must be right. An older woman clutching a designer handbag sighed dramatically. "Oh, dear. This is exactly why they need to check these things." But a younger man in a leather jacket frowned. She ripped up his ticket. "I saw it." A woman holding her phone subtly began recording. Karen barely noticed. She was enjoying this. She had worked at this airline for nearly 20 years. She had dealt with every kind of entitled passenger, from arrogant businessmen to demanding celebrities. She had made it her personal mission to ensure that rules were followed, especially by those who, in her mind, didn't belong. And right now? She was in control. David Jr. didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply took a deep breath, his father's voice echoing in his head. "When people underestimate you, son, don't waste your breath proving them wrong. Just show them." He turned to the security guard, his voice unwavering. "I need to call my father." Karen let out a short, condescending laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, that won't help you." David Jr. met her gaze, his expression calm and confident. "My dad is coming." Something about the way he said it, so certain, so final, made Karen's stomach twist, but she pushed the feeling aside. She turned back to the security guard, her confidence returning. "He's making ridiculous claims," she said dismissively. "Please escort him away so we can continue boarding." The gate agents hesitated. They had worked with Karen for years, and though she was known for her no-nonsense attitude, something felt off about this. "Ma'am," one of them spoke cautiously, "maybe we should double-check." Karen cut her off. "There's nothing to check. Some kids need to learn their place." The whispers among passengers grew louder. The woman recording the video zoomed in on Karen's face. "Excuse me?" The man in the leather jacket stepped forward. "Did you really just say that?" Karen ignored him. Instead, she pressed a button on her radio. "I want police here now." Before the situation could escalate further, a new voice cut through the tension. "Karen." Everyone turned as a middle-aged man in a crisp airline suit approached. His name tag read Tom Reynolds, Airport Operations Manager. Karen straightened, her face breaking into a self-assured smile. "Tom, glad you're here," she said smoothly. "We have an issue, actually," Tom said, cutting her off. "We might have a bigger issue than you think." He turned to David Jr. and spoke gently. "Son, what's your name?" "David Carter Jr." Tom's face visibly paled. Karen frowned. "What? Why does that matter?" Tom hesitated. His gut told him something was wrong, but Karen was so sure of herself. "Karen," he said carefully, "just to clarify, you personally destroyed this boy's ticket?" Karen scoffed. "It wasn't real. There's no way he belongs in first class." Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. Something told him she was about to regret those words. Before Tom could speak again, the automatic doors leading to the terminal slid open. And in walked David Carter Sr. His presence was impossible to ignore. Though dressed in a simple button-up and slacks, there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet authority that filled the room. Beside him was his assistant, Maria, typing furiously on her phone. Karen barely glanced at him before rolling her eyes. Just another overprotective parent. She put on her best customer service voice. "Sir, I'm sorry, but there's been a misunderstanding. Your son tried to board first class without a valid ticket." David Sr. didn't say a word. He just looked at his son, as if asking, "Are you okay?" David Jr. nodded once. Then, with an eerily calm voice, David Sr. turned to Karen and said, "I'm here for my son." Silence. Something about the way he said it made Karen's stomach lurch. And for the first time that day, she felt something creeping up her spine. A feeling she hadn't expected. Fear. Karen folded her arms, her face twisting in irritation. "Sir," she scoffed, "I don't care how much money you have. You can't just buy your way into first class." A few passengers let out low murmurs. The tension was so thick you could slice it. David Sr. let out a slow, measured breath. Then, he met Karen's gaze, his tone steady, controlled, and powerful. "Actually, I can. I own this airline." For a brief second, Karen just stared at him. Then, she let out a short, derisive laugh, as if he'd just told the most ridiculous joke in the world. Excuse me?" she sputtered. But she wasn't the only one stunned. Around them, the gate agents froze. The passengers who had been quietly watching all let out collective gasps. Some turned to each other, whispering in shock. The airport supervisor, Tom Reynolds, turned ghostly pale. He'd heard the name David Carter Sr. before. He just never imagined he'd meet him like this. Karen blinked rapidly, shaking her head. No, you're lying." David Sr. didn't argue. He didn't need to. Maria, his assistant, simply pulled out her tablet, turned it around, and held up the screen. On it was the official Carter Airlines website, a sleek corporate page that proudly displayed its CEO and founder, David Carter Sr. Karen's face drained of color. The weight of the moment finally hit her. Tom, the supervisor, stepped forward quickly, his entire demeanor shifting into damage control mode. "Mr. Carter, sir, I had no idea you were here," he stammered, sweat forming at his brow. "If I had known," David Sr. cut him off with a single look. Karen, still reeling, stammered for an excuse. This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "I was just following policy." "I thought," David Sr. raised an eyebrow. "You thought what?" Karen swallowed hard. I thought he was lying about his ticket." David Sr. tilted his head. "You ripped up a verified boarding pass because you thought a 10-year-old was lying?" The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Karen forced a smile, desperate now. "Sir, I swear I didn't mean any harm. It was just a mix-up. A simple mistake." David Sr. nodded slowly. "A mistake?" He turned his gaze to the surrounding passengers. "Did anyone else here make the same mistake?" Silence. Then, the woman who had been recording stepped forward. "I have the whole thing on video," she said, holding up her phone. Karen's face flushed red. Another passenger, the young man in the leather jacket, chimed in. She literally said, "Some kids need to learn their place." A few gasps rang out. Karen whipped around to glare at him. "That's not what I meant." David Sr. remained unshaken. "Play the video." The woman hit play on her phone, and Karen's own voice rang out clearly for all to hear. "Some kids need to learn their place." The supervisor's face hardened. He turned to a gate agent. "Pull up the records. Did David Carter Jr. have a valid ticket?" The gate agent, hands shaking slightly, quickly typed on her computer. After a few seconds, she nodded. "Yes. Paid in full. First class." "Confirmed." A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. David Sr. let out a small, knowing sigh. "You see, Miss Stevens," he said evenly, "I built this airline from nothing. I know every policy, every rule, every expectation." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but David Sr. wasn't finished. "I made sure this airline was built on inclusivity, respect, and fairness. I refuse to let people like you ruin that." Karen's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Sir, please," she begged now, her confidence completely shattered. I wasn't trying to." David Sr. turned to Tom, the supervisor. "Tell me, Tom. What does company policy say about discrimination?" Tom's jaw tightened. He already knew what had to happen. "It's grounds for immediate termination." Karen's eyes widened. "Wait," she said frantically, turning to Tom. "Wait, please. You don't have to do this. I've been here 20 years. You can't just..." Tom straightened his posture. His voice was final. "You're fired." Karen let out a guttural gasp. "No, wait. I can fix this. I'll apologize. Mr. Carter, please." But it was too late. Two security guards had already stepped forward. The woman with the phone kept recording as Karen's desperate pleas filled the terminal. "I didn't mean it," she sobbed. "Please. I need this job." But nobody spoke up for her. The same passengers who had initially trusted her authority were now watching her downfall in silence. She had used her power to belittle and humiliate a child. Now, she was the one being escorted out. As she was led away, a slow clap began. The man in the leather jacket smirked as he started it. Then the woman with the phone joined in. And then, one by one, more and more passengers began clapping. By the time Karen disappeared through the security doors, the entire terminal was applauding. David Jr. watched quietly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at his father. "Is she really gone?" David Sr. gave him a small nod. David Jr. exhaled deeply. Then, for the first time since the incident began, he smiled. David Jr. sat quietly, watching the empty space where Karen had been escorted out. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, he turned to his father. "I knew you'd handle it," he said softly. "The right way." David Sr. looked down at his son, his proud smile subtle but warm. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son," he said, "power isn't about proving yourself. It's about knowing your worth." David Jr. absorbed the words carefully. "Does that mean we don't have to fight back?" David Sr. chuckled lightly. "Oh, we fight," he said. "But not with anger. We fight with principle, with truth, and with dignity." David Jr. nodded, his young mind turning over the lesson. And in that moment, he understood. A middle-aged woman stepped forward hesitantly. She looked at David Sr., then at David Jr. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said softly. "I saw what was happening, and I should have spoken up sooner." A young father nearby nodded. "She's right," he admitted. "I was standing right there. I knew it was wrong. But I didn't say anything." More murmurs of agreement filled the air. The woman who had recorded the incident spoke up next. "I almost didn't hit record," she confessed. "But then I thought, if I don't, who will?" David Sr. offered her a nod of appreciation. "You made the right choice." The young father scratched the back of his head, looking down at David Jr. "You were braver than most of us today, kid," he admitted. "You stood your ground." David Jr. grinned slightly, the weight on his chest finally lifting. He had felt small when Karen tore up his ticket. Now? He felt seen. Heard. Respected. The airport supervisor, Tom, cleared his throat. He turned to David Sr., his expression genuinely remorseful. "Mr. Carter, sir, I give you my word," he said. "This should never have happened. And it will not happen again." David Sr. listened as Tom continued. "I'll be reviewing our training policies. Every employee will be retrained to ensure this kind of discrimination is wiped out. Effective immediately." David Sr. nodded approvingly. "Good," he said. "Because no one deserves to be treated the way my son was today." Tom exhaled sharply, relief evident in his stance. Then, with a genuine smile, he gestured toward the gate. "We'd be honored if you'd let us make it up to you." With that, the new boarding agent, a young woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. She knelt down slightly, meeting David Jr. at eye level. "Mr. Carter," she said warmly, "we're ready for you now." David Jr. glanced at his father. David Sr. nodded. With renewed confidence, David Jr. took his father's hand and stepped forward. The new flight attendant smiled warmly as she scanned his ticket. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said respectfully. And just like that, David Jr. stepped onto the plane, not as a victim, but as a young man who knew his worth. As David Sr. watched his son walk ahead, he took a deep breath. This was more than just a victory. It was a reminder. A reminder that kindness and respect should always be prioritized over prejudice and power trips. A reminder that change starts with one person speaking up. And most importantly, a reminder that knowing your worth is the greatest power of all. The headlines spread like wildfire. First-class discrimination, airline employee fired after ripping up child's ticket. Self-made billionaire exposes airport racism, teaches powerful lesson. The video footage, the moment Karen sneered, the second she tore up David Jr.'s ticket, the stunned silence when David Sr. revealed his identity, was everywhere. People reacted fiercely. Some called her a disgrace. Others said she was a symbol of everything wrong with the system. Within days, Karen found herself blacklisted from major airlines. She tried applying elsewhere, but her name was already synonymous with public disgrace. One rejection email summed it up perfectly: "At our company, we believe in fairness and respect for all. We cannot move forward with your application at this time." Karen sat at home, staring at the news, realizing that in a matter of minutes, she had thrown away everything. And the worst part? She had done it to herself. Meanwhile, David Jr. was changed by the experience. He had felt it firsthand, the assumptions, the prejudice, the injustice. But more importantly, he had learned how to stand firm, stay calm, and fight back with dignity. That night, as he and his father sat together at home, he looked up at the man who had built everything from nothing. "I want to be like you," he said. "I want to make things better." David Sr. smiled. "Then start with this," he said. "Treat people right, no matter who they are. And never let anyone tell you where you do or don't belong." David Jr. nodded. And in his heart, he knew, this was only the beginning of his own journey. The video would fade. The headlines would change. But the lesson? It would stay. Because the truth is, you never know who someone is. And whether they own an airline or not, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. That's the real, first-class experience. The end.